Hello, Viva Lamore here. I was laying in bed today feeling terribly devastated about everything. I mean, there's the pandemic, there's this election, God knows what's going to happen. I stood in line for 40 minutes on Thursday in the rain and I voted and I don't know what else to do. So I got up, I put on my Schiaparelli knockoff and the 1940s hat that I bought in Palermo with my friend Honey Lulu. Hello, honey. And I thought I would do something to mark 10 years since I was evicted from my apartment in the East Village. Yes, January 25th, 2011, I was evicted from the East Village. I wrote a one-person play about my experience. It was done at Here Theater. And then my life was overwhelmed and I ended up moving to Europe and I never did the play again. But I thought I would offer a series of creative readings in the weeks leading up to January 25th, that devastating anniversary, in case, you want to while away a little time with me while we are seeing whether this ship is sinking or not. Maybe you'd be interested in this little offering. Scene 1. Books are scattered throughout the stage. They are stacked, piled, and arranged in a variety of configurations. One enormous open book is mounted upstage. Its blank pages are outstretched. A few books are suspended midair. A fan beneath them causes them to flutter occasionally, like a flock of birds. I was born on the Lower East Side. Well, they call it the East Village now, but south of 14th Street from the East River to Bowery and down to Pearl was called the Lower East Side until Andy Warhol and a bunch of real estate developers decided East Village had a nicer ring. Lower East Side, as the Puerto Ricans call it, which oddly enough is basically how my mother pronounces it.
Vicky 啊，你想要被带到 Lower East Side 啊？这灰暗破散，哎呀！
For 20 years, I lived in the same apartment on Avenue C and 11th Street. I was evicted last year. Well, now it's 10 years. And I still don't know what to do with all of my books. My son once counted and said there were 500 of them. This is a picture of my son when he was a baby. And then after my boyfriend moved in with his books, there were so many that we stayed up one night and organized them into sections. As you walked into my apartment, there was a bookshelf full of plays. Everything from Aeschylus to Tennessee Williams, except for Shakespeare, who had his own little corner. On the opposite wall was the shelf of Suffering Semites, from my crash course on the Intifada when I was writing a play partially set in the Middle East. Suffering Semites was mixed in with books on history, since recorded history did basically start in that part of the world. Well, Western recorded history. In the bookcase jutting into the room were American, French, and British novels, sort of like the Allied powers, unavoidable, except for the Russians who were in my bedroom. Then there were several shelves on the wall with books on Asia that I called the Yellow Peril. The Nanking Massacre, The Chinese in America, that's by Peter Kwong, who recently passed away, and I miss him so much. Yellow Peril was also a pretty fitting name for that shelf since it kept on falling down. So I put the heaviest books in the nearby poetry section. A book on Japanese POW camps fittingly ended up next to Wilfred Owen's. Oh, and in the poetry section were also books by my good friend and mentor, James Purdy, even though all I have are his novels. But it was kind of perfect that he lived next to Walt Whitman and under John Keats, sort of like an imaginary apartment building in my bookshelf. I could imagine James going next door to borrow some salt or sugar from Walt Whitman, or going upstairs to have a drink with John Keats and listen to him moan about his relationship with Fanny Braun. In my bedroom, besides all of those Russian novels, were travel books, books on psychology and mysticism and philosophy, books about dreams, dreams about books. The lights change, projection. The old, burned out Lower East Side is seen on a giant flying book. It was a sunny spring day in 1990 that I saw a sign in Prana, which was the only health food store in the East Village at the time. Someone was looking for a roommate on 11th Street between Avenues B and C for $300 a month. 11th Street between B and C, I thought. Weird. There seemed to be a concerted effort to settle new people on that street. Maybe because it was so scary. I had just been on that block to see another apartment. A glassy-eyed kid doing wheelies on a pint-sized dirt bike suddenly pulled out a gun and began shooting into the air. I ducked into the hallway of a burnt-out crack building and hid until that kid went away. Drug dealers were one thing. I mean, you could just ignore them. But guns. I said to myself that no way would I ever live in that block. But so far, every other place I'd seen was either totally depressing or way over our means. So I took down the sign, found a payphone, and called for an appointment. As early as the 3rd century BC, overcrowding in the city was producing a new urban form, the apartment block or insula. Building heights rose to at least 3 stories in the 3rd century BC, to 5 or more by the 1st century BC. It combined shops and workshops on the ground floor, flats on the floors above, thus achieving mixed uses in every block. The Lower East Side used to be full of secondhand shops, bookshops, clothing, furniture. Every night you could find a party at either a Cliff shop on 7th Street or Adrian's store on 10th. Drinks, music, about a dozen amazing neighborhood people interested in history, art, the world. But think about it. Of course, the people attracted to vintage shops are all smart and interesting. To buy vintage means you don't need a magazine to tell you what's hot, what's hip, what's next. You're not a slave to what's fashionable. You have your own style. To buy vintage means you know you are part of history, that you are wearing and using what someone wore or used 30 or 50 or 100 years ago. And so you are personally, intimately connected with whoever this person was. You are literally walking in their shoes. Besides, buying secondhand is a hell of a lot cheaper. I bought most of my books secondhand at Tompkins Square Books. The store was owned by a Filipino guy named Gani. I worked at Sidewalk Cafe when I was 17, and Tompkins Square Books was right next door on Avenue A. That was before I moved to 7th Street. After my shift ended, I would spend the whole night there reading and listening to music. Yeah, they had records there too that you could play before buying. I learned about Maria Callas and Leadbelly and Folkway records. I picked up anything that said classic on it, which led me to some obscure corners. Weisman's Against Nature, Andreev's The Red Laugh, Flaubert's The Legend of St. Julian. And then at that point, I picked up all these different books that were on the stage and showed you some books that came from Tompkins Square Books. This one comes from Gani's shop, and this one, and this one. That's it until next time with another vintage outfit and some more from Dispossessed.